Chapter 3. It must have been some imp of the perverse, or some sardonic pull from dark, hidden sources, which made me change my plans as I did. I had long before resolved to limit my observations to architecture alone, and I was even then hurrying toward the square in an effort to get quick transportation out of this festering city of death and decay. But the sight of old Zadok Allen set up new currents in my mind and made me slacken my pace uncertainly. I had been assured that the old man could do nothing but hint at wild, disjointed, and incredible legends, and I had been warned that the natives made it unsafe to be seen talking to him. Yet, the thought of this aged witness to the town's decay, with memories going back to the early days of ships and factories, was a lure that no amount of reason could make me resist. After all, the strangest and maddest of myths are often merely symbols or allegories based upon truth. And old Zadok must have been everything which went on around Innsmouth for the last 90 years. Curiosity flared up beyond sense and caution, and in my youthful egotism, I fancied I might be able to sift a nucleus of real history from the confused, extravagant outpouring I would probably extract with the aid of raw whiskey. I knew that I could not accost him then and there, for the firemen would surely notice and object. Instead, I reflected. I would prepare by getting some bootleg liquor at a place where the grocery boy had told me it was plentiful. Then I would loaf near the fire station in apparent casualness and fall in with old Zadok after he had started on one of his frequent rambles. The youth said that he was very restless, seldom sitting around the station for more than an hour or two at a time. A quart bottle of whiskey was easily, though not cheaply, obtained in the rear of a dingy variety store just off the square in Elliott Street. The dirty-looking fellow who waited on me had a touch of the starring Innsmouth look, but was quite civil in his way, being perhaps used to the custom of such convivial strangers, truckmen, gold buyers, and the like, as were occasionally in town. Re-entering the square, I saw the luck was with me, for, shuffling out of Payne Street around the corner of the Gilman house, I glimpsed nothing less than the tall, lean, tattered form of old Zadok Allen himself. In accordance with my plan, I attracted his attention by brandishing my newly purchased bottle, and soon realized that he had begun to shuffle wistfully after me as I turned into Waite Street on my way to the most deserted region I could think of. I was steering my course by the map the grocery boy had prepared, and was aiming for the wholly abandoned stretch of southern waterfront, which I had previously visited. The only people in sight there had been the fishermen on the distant breakwater, and by going a few squares south, I could get beyond the range of these, finding a pair of seats on some abandoned wharf, and being free to question old Zadok unobserved for an indefinite time. Before I reached Main Street, I could hear a faint and wheezy, "Hey, mister," behind me. I had presently allowed the old man to catch up and take copious pulls from the quart bottle. I began putting out feelers as we walked along on Water Street, and turned southward amidst the omnipresent desolation and crazily tilted ruins, but found that the aged tongue did not loosen as quickly as I had expected. At length, I saw a grass-grown opening toward the sea, between crumbling brick walls, with the weedy length of an earth and masonry wharf projecting beyond. Piles of moss-covered stones near the water promised tolerable seats, and the scene was sheltered from all possible view by a ruined warehouse on the north. Here, I thought, was the ideal place for a long, secret, colloquy. So I guided my companion down the lane and picked out spots to sit in among the mossy stones. The air of death and desertion was ghoulish, and the smell of fish almost insufferable, but I was resolved to let nothing deter me. About 4 hours remained for conversation if I were to catch the 8 o'clock coach for Arkham, and I began to dole out more liquor to the ancient tippler, meanwhile eating my own frugal lunch. In my donations, I was careful not to overshoot the mark, for I did not wish Zadok's vinous garrulus to pass into a stupor. After an hour, his furtive taciturnity showed signs of disappearing, but much to my disappointment, he still sidetracked my questions about Innsmouth and its shadowed, haunted past. He would babble of current topics, revealing a wide acquaintance with newspapers and a great tendency to philosophize in a sententious village fashion. Toward the end of the second hour, I feared my quart of whiskey would not be enough to produce results, and was wondering whether I had better leave old Zadok and go back for more. Just then, however, chance made the opening which my questions had been unable to make. The wheezing accent's rambling took a turn that caused me to lean forward and listen alertly. My back was toward the fishy-smelling sea, but he was facing it, and something or other had caused his wandering gaze to light on the low, distant line of Devil Reef, then showing plainly and almost fascinating above the waves. The sight seemed to displease him, for he began a series of weak curses which ended in a confidential whisper and knowing leer. He bent toward me, took hold of my coat, lapel, and hissed out some hints that could not be mistaken. That's where it all began. That cursed place of all wickedness, where the deep water starts. Gate of hell. Sheer drop down to bottomless sound and line Kintick. Old Captain Obed done it. Him that found about mooring was good for him in the South Sea Islands. Everybody was in a bad way them days. Trade falling off, mills losing business. Even the new ones, and the best of our men folks killed a privateer in the War of 1812, or lost with the Elysee brigand, the Ranger, Snow, both of them, Gilman Venters. Obed Marsh, he had 3 ships afloat, Brigantine Columbia, Brig Hetty, and embarked Cemetery Queen. He was the only one to keep on with the East Indian Pacific trade, though Eastern Martin's Barkentine Malay Pride made a venture as late as 28. Never was nobody like Captain Obed. Old Limbo Satan. I can mind him telling about foreign parts and calling all the folks stupid for going to Christian meeting and bearing their burdens meek and lowly. Says they'd oughter get better gods like some of the folks in the Indies. Gods and bring 'em good fish in return for sacrifices, and really answer folks' prayers. Matt Elliott, his first mate, talked a lot too. He was again folks doing any heathen things. Told about an island east of Othadi where there was a lot of stones, ruins, older and anybody knew anything about. Kind of like on Pawnee in the Carolinas, but with carvings of faces that look like big statues on Easter Island. There was a little volcanic island near there too, where there was other ruins with different carvings, ruins all worn away like they'd been under sea, on account of with pictures of awful monsters all over them. Well, Sir Matt, he says the natives around there had all the fish they could catch, and sported bracelets and armlets and head rigs made about it, queer kind of gold and covered with pictures of monsters, just like the ones carved over the ruins on the little island. Sort of fish-like frogs or frog-like fishes. Frog-like fishes that was drawed in all kinds of positions, like they was human beings. Nobody could get about them where they got all the stuff. And all the other natives wondered how they managed to find fish in plenty, even when the very next islands had lean pickings. Matt, he got to wondering too, and so did Captain Obed. Now, Obed, he notices, besides, that's lots of the heading some young folks, and drop about a sight for good from year to year, and that there weren't too many old folks around. Also, he thinks some of the folks looks darn queer, even for convicts. And he took Obed to get the truth out of him. I don't know how he done it, but he began by trading for the gold-like things they wore. Asked them where they come from and if they could get more, and finally wormed the story about the old chief, Wallachia, they called him. Nobody but Obed had ever believed that the old yeller devil, but the captain could read folks like they was books. Nobody never believes me now when I tell them, and I don't suppose you will, young feller. Though, come to look at you kind of got them sharp reading eyes like Obed had. The old man's whisper grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible and sincere portentousness of his annotation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but drunken fantasy. Well, sir, Obed, he learned that there's things on this earth as most folks never heard about. They wouldn't believe if they did hear. It seems these convicts was sacrificing heaps of their young men and maidens to some kind of god things that lived under the sea, and getting all kinds of favor in return. They met the things on the little inlet with the queer ruins, and it seems them awful pictures of frogfish monsters was supposed to be pictures of these things. Maybe there was kind of critters it's got all the mermaid stories and such started. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from there. Seems they was some of the things alive in the stone buildings when the island come up sudden to the surface. That's how the convicts got wind they was down there. Made sign talk as soon as they got over being skirt and pieced up a bargain before long. Them things, like human sacrifices, had 'em ages before, but lost track of the upper world after a time. What they done to the victims, it ain't for me to say, and I guess I guess Obed wasn't none too sharp about asking. But it was all right with the heathens, because they'd been having a hard time and was desperate about everything. They give a certain number of young folks to the sea things twice every year. May even a Halloween regular as could be. Also give some of the carved knickknacks they made. What the things agreed to give in return was plenty of fish. They drove them in from all over the sea, and a few gold things like now and then. Well, as I says, the natives met the things on the little volcanic inlet, going there in canoes with the sacrifices, etc., and bringing back any of the gold-like jewels as was coming to them. At first, the things didn't ever go onto the main island, but after a time, they come to want to. Seems they hankered after mixing with the folks and having inter-ceremonies on the big days, May Eve and Halloween. You see, they were able to live both in and out of water. What they call amphibians. I guess. The Kanaks told them the hollow folks from the other islands might want to wipe them off if they get wind of their being there, but they says they don't care much because they could wipe out the whole brood of humans if they was willing to bother, that is. Indians didn't have certain signs such as use on account of the lost old ones, whoever they was. But not wanting to bother, they'd lay low when anybody visited the island. When it come to mating with them toad-looking fishes, the Konyaks kind of balked. But they learnt something as put a new face on the matter. Seems that human folks has got a kind of relation to such water base, that everything alive come about the water on account of only needs a little change to go back again. Them things told the Konyaks that if they mix bloods, there'd be children as look human at first, but later turn more and more like the things, till finally they'd take to the water and join the main lot of things down there. And this is the important part, young feller. Them is turned into fish things and went into the water wouldn't never die. Them things never died except they was all killed violent. Well, sir, it seems by the time Obed knowed them islanders, they was all full of fish blood from them deep water things. When they got old and began to show it, they was keep hid until they felt like taking to the water and quitting the place. Some was more touched than others, and some never did change quite enough to take to the water. But mostly, they turned about just the way them things said. Them was born more like the thing changed early, but them was nearly human sometimes, staying on the island till they was past 70. Though they'd usually gone down under for trial trips afore that. Folks as had took to the water generally come back a good deal to visit. So a man would be a-talking to his own 5 times great-grandfather who'd left the dry land a couple of 100 years or so afore. Everybody got about the idea of dying except in canoe wars with the other islanders, or as sacrifices to the sea gods down below, or from snake bite or plague or sharp galloping ailments or something, before they could take to the water. But simply looked forward to kind of change, that waiting a bit horrible after a while. They thought what they got was, well, all they had to give up. And I guess Obed kind of come to think the same himself when he chewed over old Waleka's story a bit. Waleka, though, was one of the few as hadn't none of the fish blood, being of a royal line that intermarried with royals on other islands. Waleka, he showed Obed a lot of rites and incantations as he had to do with the sea things, and let him see some of the folks in the village as had changed a lot from human shape. Somehow or another, though, he never would let him see one of the regular things from right up out of the water. In the end, he gave him a funny kind of thingamajig made about to lead or something that he said would bring up the fish things from any place in the water where they might be a nest of them. The idea was to drop it down with the right kind of prayers and such. Waleka allowed as the things was scattered all over the world, so as anybody that looked about could find a nest and bring them up if they was wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all. Wanted Obed shut away, kept away from the island, but Captain was a sharp for again and found he could get them gold-like things so cheap it'd pay him to make a specialty of them. Things went on that way for years, and Obed got enough of that gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery and White's old run-down fulling mill. He didn't dare sell the pieces like they was, for folks to be all the time asking questions. All the same, his crews would get a piece and dispose of it now and then, even though they were swore to keep quiet, and he let his women folks wear some of the pieces, as was more human-like than most. Well, come about 38, when I was 7 years old, Obed, he found the island people all wiped out between voyages. Seems the other islanders had got wind of what was going on and had took matters into their own hands. Suppose they must have had, after all, them old magic signs, as the sea thing says, was the only things they was afeard of. No telling what any of them cognacs will chance to get a hold of when the sea bottom throws up some island with ruins older than the deluge. Pious cusses these was. They didn't leave nothing standing on either the main island or the little volcanic isles that what parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. In some places there was little stones strewed about, like charms, with something on them, like what you call a swastika nowadays. Probably them was the old ones' signs. Folks all wiped about. No trace of no gold-like things, and none of the nearby cognacs would breathe a word about the matter. They wouldn't even admit they'd ever been any people on that island. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard, seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth, too, because in seafaring days, what profited the master of a ship generally profited the crew proportionately. Most of the folks around the town took the hard times kind of sheep-like and resigned, but they was in a bad shape because the fishing was petering out and the mills wasn't doing none too well either. Then's the time Obed began cruising at the folks for being dull sheep and praying to a Christian heaven as didn't help him none. He told them he'd knowed folks as prayed to gods that give him something you really need, and says if a good bunch of men would stand by him, he could maybe get a hold of certain powers as would bring plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Of course, them is served on the Sumter Queen, and Seed the Island knowed what he meant, and wasn't none too anxious to get close to see things like they'd heard tell on. But them as didn't know what 'twas all about got kind of swayed by what Obed had to say, and began to ask him what he could do to set him on the way to the faith as bring him results. Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within it a sort of crude allegory based upon the strangeness of Innsmouth and elaborated by imagination at once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Not for a moment did I believe that the tale had any real, substantial foundation, but nonetheless, the account held a hint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in references of strange jewels clearly akin to the malign tiara I had seen in Newburyport. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange island, and possibly the wild stories were lies of the bygone Obed himself, rather than of this antique toper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of thickness had come into his high, wheezy voice. He licked the nose of the bottle and slipped it into his pocket, then, beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself, I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained, bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair portion of them. Poor Matt. Matt, he last was aging. It tried to line up the folks on his side, and had long walks with the preachers. No use. They run to the congregational parson about town, and the Methodist fella quit, never did see. Resolved Babcock, the Baptist parson, again, wrath of Jehovah. I was a mighty little critter, but I heard what I heard and seen what I seen. Dagon and Ashereth, Berlin and Beelzebub, Golden Gaff and the idols of Canaan and the Philistines, Babylonish abominations, many tackle of arson. He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to a stupor after all. But then I gently shook his shoulder. He turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out some more obscure phrases. Don't believe me, eh? Then just tell me, young feller, why Captain Obed and 20-odd other folks used to row about to Devil Reef in the dead of night and chant things so loud you could hear 'em all over town when the wind was right. Tell me that, eh? And tell me why Obed was, alas, dropping heavy things down into the water, other side of the reef, where the bottom shoots down like a cliff, lowering your kin sign. Tell me what he done with that funny-shaped lead thingamajig is what they could give him. Eh, boy? And what did they howl on May Eve and again the next Halloween? And why did the church parsons, fellas as used to be sailors, wear them queer robes and cover themselves with them gold-like things Obed brung, eh? The watery blue eyes were almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white beard bristles electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, where he had begun to cackle evilly. Beginning to see, eh? Maybe you'd like to have been me in them days, when I see things at night about to see from the couple of top of my house. Oh, I can tell you little pictures of big ears, and I wasn't missing nothing of what was gossiped about Captain Obed and the folks about the reef. how and about the night I took my pa's ship's glass up to the couple of seed, the reef, and bristling thick with shapes that dove off quicks the moon riz. Obed and the folks was in the dory, but them shapes dove off the far side into the deep water and never come up. How'd you like to be a little shaver alone up in a couple of watching shapes, and wasn't human shapes, eh? The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me that it was shaking. It was not altogether that of mirth. Suppose one night you seed something heavy heaved off Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then learned next day a young fellow was missing from home, eh? Did anybody ever see Hide a Hair Hiram Gillum again? Did they? And Nick Pierce and Luley Waite and Aderam Southwick and Henry Garrison. Shapes talking sign language with their hands. Them as had real hands. Well, sir, that was the time Obed began to get on his feet again. Folks see his 3 daughters are wearing gold-like things as nobody ever did see on them before, and smoke started coming about the reef and Chimbley. Other folks were prospering too. Fish began to swarm into the harbor, fit to kill, and heaven knows what size cargoes we began to ship out of Newburyport, Arkham, and Boston. 'Twas then Obed got the old branch railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heard about the catching and come up in sloops, but they was all lost. Nobody never see 'em again. And just then our folks organized the esoteric order of Dagon and bought Masonic Hall off in Calvary Commandery for it. Matt Elliott was a Mason, and again, the selling, but he dropped about sight just then. Remember, I ain't saying Obed was set on having things just like I was on that Kaneki Isle. I don't think he aimed at first to do no mixing, nor raise no youngins to take to the water and turn into fishes with eternal life. He wanted them gold things, and was willing to pay heavy, and I guess the others was satisfied for a while. Come in 46, the town done some looking and thinking for itself. Too many folks missing. Too much wild preaching at meeting of a Sunday. Too much talk about the reef. I guess I done a bit by telling Select Mimari what I see from the cupola. There was a party one night. This followed Obed's, crawled about the reef, and I heard shots betwixt the dories. Next day, Obed and 32 others was in a gall with everybody, and wondering just was afoot, and just what charge, and again, and could be got to hold. God, if anybody to look ahead a couple of weeks later, when nothing had been thrown into the sea for that long. Zadok was showing signs of fright and exhaustion, and I let him keep silence for a while, though, glancing apprehensively at my watch, the tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad of that tide, for at high water the fishy smell might not be so bad. Again, I strained to catch his whispers. That awful night, I seed 'em. I was up in a couple of hordes of 'em, swarms of 'em, all over the reef and swimming up the harbor into the manor. God, what happened in the streets of Innsmouth that night? They rattled our door, but Papa wouldn't open. Then he climbed out the kitchen window and with his musket to find Selectman Maury and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and the dying, shots and screams, shouting in the old square and town square and New Church Green. God throat open, proclamation, treason. Called it the plague when folks come in and found half our people missing. Nobody left but them as them join in with Obed and them things, or else kept quiet. Never heard of my pa no more. The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Everything cleaned up in the morning, but there was traces. Obed, he kinda takes charge and says things is gonna be changed. Others will worship with us at meeting time, and certain houses he's gotta entertain guests. They wanted to mix like they did with the Kenyans, and he for one didn't feel bound to stop them. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man on the subject. He says he brung us fish and treasure and should have what they hankered after. Nothing was to be different on the assault. On the outside, nothing was to be different on the outside. Only he was to keep shy of strangers if we know what was good for us. We all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on, they was a second and third oaths that some of us took. Them said help special, get special rewards, gold and such. No use barking, for there was millions of them down there. They'd rather not start rising and wiping out humankind, but they was gave away and forced to. They could do a lot towards just that. We didn't have them old charms to cut off like folks in the South Sea did, and them cognacs would never give away their secrets. Yield up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and harborage in the town when they wanted it, and they'd let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother no strangers as might bear tales outside. That is, without they got praying. All in the band of the faithful order of Dagon, and the children should never die, but go back to the mother Hydron and Father Dagon, what we all come from. Count Cthulhu, Fatgan, Foggun, Nahu Cthulhu, Ragan Tufu. Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath. Poor old soul. To what pitiful depths of hallucination had his liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him, brought that fertile, imaginative brain. He began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard. God, what I seen, I was 15-year-old. Me and Tickle, up Harson, the folks was missing, and them has killed themselves. Them is told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places was all called crazy, like you're calling me right now. But God, when I seen, they'd have killed me long ago for what I know. Only I took the forsaken oath and a dagging off an Obed, so was protected. Unless in a jury of them, I proved I told things knowing and deliberate, but I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. It was around Civil War time when children born 46 begun to grow up. Some of them, that is. I was afeared. Never did no prying after that awful night. Never seen one of them close to in all my life. That is, never no full-blooded one. I went to the war, and after I had any guts or sense, I'd have never come back, but settled away from here. But folks wrote me things. Wasn't so bad. That I suppose was because government draftman was in town after 63. After the war, it was just as bad again. People began to fall off. Mills and shops shut down. Shipping stopped and the harbor choked up. Railroad give up. But, they never stopped swimming in and about the river from that cursed reef of Satan. More and more attic winders got boarded up, and more noises was heard in houses it wasn't supposed to have nobody in them. Folks outside have their stories about us. Suppose you've heard plenty and seen them. What questions you ask? Stories about things they've seen and then about that queer jewelry that still comes in from somewheres and ain't quite all melted up. Nothing never gets definite. Nobody will believe nothing. They call them gold-like things pirate loot and allow the Innsmouth folks to have them for blood or distempered or something. Besides them that lives here, show off as many strangers as they can. Encourage the rest not to get very curious, especially around night time. Beasts balked at the critters. Houses, wolves, mules. But they got autos, that was all right. In 46, Captain Obed took his second wife that nobody in the town never see. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to by them as he'd called in. Had 3 children by her. 2 has disappeared young, but one gal has looked like anybody else and was educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham fellow. Just didn't suspect nothing. But nobody outside will have nothing to do with Innsmouth folks now. Barnabas Marsh that runs the reefery now is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Onesporus, his oldest son. But his mother was another of them, as was never seen outdoors. Right now, Barnabas is about changed. Can't shut his eyes no more, and all about O-shape. They say he still wears clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells before they go for good. They ain't been seen about in public for 9 or 10 years. Don't know how his poor wife can feel. She come from Ipswich, and they now leached Barnabas when he courted her 50-odd year ago. Obed, he died at 78, and all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children's dead, and the rest, God knows. The sound of the incoming tide was very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out toward the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew shriller and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech. Hey, what do you say something? How do you like to be living in a town like this, with everything rotten and dying, and boarded up monsters crawling and bleeding and barking and hopping around, black cellars and attics everywhere you turn, huh? How do you like to hear howling night after night from the churches and order of Dungan Hall, and what's doing part of the howling? How do you like to hear what comes from that awful reef every May Eve and Halloween Mass? Hey, think the old man's crazy, eh? What's, let me tell you, that ain't the worst. Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I care to own. Curse you done said that, starting at me with them eyes. I told old Marsh he's in hell and he's got to stay there. In hell, I says. Can't get me. I ain't done nothing, nor told nobody nothing. Oh, you young fella. Well, even if I ain't told nobody nothing yet, I'm a gonna now. You just sit still and listen to me, boy. This is what I ain't never told nobody. I said I didn't do no prying after that night, but I found things about just the same. You want to know what the real horror is, eh? Well, it's this. It ain't what them fish devils has done, but what they going to do. They're bringing things up about a wall they come from into the town. Been doing it for years and slacking them up lately. Them houses north of the river betwixt Water and Main Streets is full of them devils, what they brung, and when they get ready. I say when they get ready. Ever hear tell of Shoggoth? Hey, do you hear me? I know what them things be. I seen them one night. The hideous suddenness and inhumane frightfulness of the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes, looking past me toward the Maldurious Sea, were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see, only the incoming tide, with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long-flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently his voice came back, albeit as a trembling whisper. Get out of here. Get out of here. They seen us. Get out for your life. Don't wait for nothing. They know. Run for quick. Run out of this town. Another heavy wave dashed against the loosening masonry of the bygone wharf and changed the mad ancient's whisper to another inhuman and blood-curdling scream. Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch on my shoulder and dashed wildly inland toward the street, reeling northward around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there. And when I reached Water Street and looked along it toward the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen.